Episode 687. Book Talk begins at 20 minutes and 20 seconds. Cranford begins with episode 679. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 687, Hard Cider and Elderberry Wine. This episode of CraftLit was brought to you by our lovely patrons, channel members, and premium members at craftlit.com/premium. Without you, this would not be possible. This week, we would like to thank Lynn Span Bowditch, Julie Kipp, Laurie Henshaw, Aaron Gilmore, and Melanie. Thank you so much. Well, hello, how are you? I overdid it. I made a tactical error in life, and on Monday, on Memorial Day, Andrew and I took a wee little drive up the river to Jim Thorpe. There is a town in Pennsylvania called Jim Thorpe. You may remember him. He was Native American. I cannot right now off the top of my head remember which tribe he was from. What an interesting lad he was. Had his Olympic medals taken from him because he sort of kind of almost played a game once where he made money, and it was a travesty, and it took almost 100 years. Oh no, maybe it did actually take 100 years before he got posthumously his award back under his name. But I think it was in Sweden. Was it Sweden? The king of Sweden said, "You are the best athlete I've ever seen." And he was. We read the list of like all of the different sports that he played. Basically, if you can think of a sport, he played it. And he didn't just play it, he played it really well. So this town in Pennsylvania decided that they wanted to be called Jim Thorpe. Okay, either way, it's gorgeous. This little town is like, it's almost like a Twilight Zone. Like if somebody was thinking, okay, we have to have a perfect and idyllic town so we can have something really creepy and awful happen in it. This would be that perfect and idyllic town, except nothing creepy is happening in it. It's just charming. It's what New Hope aspired to be and then took a left turn and became a haven for absentee landlords. And now it's just, I don't even know why Bradley Cooper bothered to move here, because we are not happy with the decisions that the town council has been making. It is very distressing. Then that's nothing new. However, the whole reason that I bring up Jim Thorpe, aside from the fact that that's how I overextended myself, is that we went to a lovely little cidery. It is a tasting room. It is called Wild Elder Wine and Cider Company. You may be able to tell from that title that elderberries and elderflower show up in this. Now, Andrea is not a huge cider lover, and I am not able to drink red wine anymore, so never the twain shall meet, except they let us do a tasting flight, where we could do wine and cider. So we had elderberry wine, we had elderberry cider, we had dandelion cider, which was wild. We had Silver Fox wine, which was excellent. I guess it's a silver fox berry or grape. Anyway, I'm not just saying this to tempt you and think, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we could go to Jim Thorpe and go to this place that Heather mentioned. I'm bringing this up to you because I'm getting my reading glasses on. Because they can ship. Yes. If you look on Instagram, you can find them at Wild Elder. That's their full name, WILDELDER. Or you can go to, I know this is shocking, wildelder.com. And the other thing that's really cool about Jim Thorpe is there is no open container law. So I was able to get a can of cider to go while we walked hither and thither, and it was just lovely. So we had to, obviously, get some cider. So we got some wine and some cider, and it was all marvelous and wonderful. And here's my question to you. One of the first plays that I did in high school was Arsenic and Old Lace. I did not get to play one of the fabulous older women. I got to play the ingenue, which was thoroughly embarrassing. And I believe Rick Maxey, who played Mortimer, and our blocking wound up being with us on opposite sides of the stage. And then the blocking direction was they kiss. So we had to walk rapidly to the middle of the stage to kiss. I do not know why we were blocked like that. I just remember it being very awkward. And Rick was very charming and lovely and a junior, and I was a freshman. No pressure. But the whole reason I bring it up is because if you haven't seen Arsenic and Old Lace before or read it or been in it, you would not know that elderberry wine is the thing upon which the entire plot hinges. And it is a nostalgia for elderberry wine that draws victims in to this deception and then bad end. For the longest of times, I have not been able to find elderflower anything local, elderberry thing local. This was elderberry local. They grow them. I have no idea what they look like. I have no idea what they taste like on their own. And what we learned is that the way that they do their ciders, at least there, is they'll take an apple base, like a dry apple or a sweet apple base, and then they infuse that with whatever they're going to add, in this case, elderberries. It was excellent. Or dandelions, which is weird, but also very good. With the wine, it gets winified by just squeezing the berries / grapes. Sometimes they'll put grapes in. If they don't have enough berries, they'll add grapes, which is not a surprise. In fact, they may start with kind of a generic grape base to begin with. Put the berries in, squish it all down, and then add yeast, and that does the fermenting fabulousness that happens in wine. I don't know what these berries taste like. Somebody tell me. I also don't know, can you just eat them off the vine like you could a raspberry or a blueberry? I'm fascinated. And now that I've actually tasted what they taste like in wine and cider, I am really curious, because it was neither were overly berry-ish, do you know what I mean? Like a tart sweetness. They were very rich tasting. There was a lot going on in there. Huge kudos to Wild Elder Wine and Cider Company. I was really impressed. Plus, they were awfully nice. They were just lovely. So that was great. By the time this episode airs, we will have chosen the winner of the Sir Walter Scott cross stitch and shipped that off to the lucky winner. This month, the month of June 2025, we have another really awesome raffle option, actually 3 options to give away. Listener Aaron has donated to us a foundation pattern piecing. Is that right? FPP, foundation pattern piecing, quilting pattern. She has 3. One that she has, which is separate from this, I'm going to put a link to in the show notes. That's a free book tracker quilt pattern, which is adorable. It's basically like if you were going to, I know some people do cross stitches, some people do coloring books, some people do print out things that they can use to track their books that they've read during the year. This is a foundation paper piecing book tracker quilt that is just adorable and so cute, and it's free. So if you want to see if you'd be interested in going in for the raffle for any of the 3 other items, which are considerably more detailed and I think require a practice run if you are not familiar with this, I highly recommend you go take a look. Erin did beautiful work on these. The 3 options that you would be put into the running for, and we can only do 1 raffle at a time, so it'll be random who winds up winning which one. One is Sherlock Holmes, which is really marvelous. It's him in profile with his lovely pipe. The next one is Jane Austen, also in profile and looking ever so lovely and peaceful and, literary in profile. And the last one is a really cozy fireside reading picture. So it is a complete scene of a young woman on the floor, on her stomach, reading a book with a mug of something hot and lovely in front of her, a cast iron stove behind her with the tea kettle on, quilt on the wall, snow in the windows. It's just lovely. And I am very seriously thinking about doing the book tracker, because since I'm in a downswing again, having overextended myself at Jim Thorpe, I need to do something easy and stitchy in bed, and I actually can't face any more of the pangolin scales. I need something that's a little bit different. So I may very well wind up trying out that book tracker pattern. I'll let you know next week because I think I'm going to be stitching in bed. Along with stitching in bed, I did score from Mrs. Depew Vintage a set of stays. I mean, not a sewn put together set of stays, but a set of 6 stays, which are very rare. And you really just have to kind of hit your timing right on her site to have anything original coming in. And I got it, and I'm very excited. And they're really kind of cool. These are stays. They're not whalebone, obviously. They're flexible. They are sewn into little cotton wrappers. They're original ones. And I'm just saying, looking at the stitching on these from back in the day, they're spectacular. They are works of art. Just the little casings that these things are in. It's beautiful. Oh, and I did forget to tell you, I have a recipe for elderberry wine, easy elderberry wine, that I will put into the show notes for you. If you have access to them and haven't made that before, please do and let me know how it goes. I'm fascinated with this stuff now. The last thing I wanted to let you know, I got a lovely, lovely email or message from Amy in Washington, who is listening to Moby Dick, which just started. By the time this comes out, we will have posted episode 2, and we'll be getting ready to post episode 3. I'm very happy with Moby Dick so far, but I'm even happier because Amy wrote and said that when she heard the voice of the reader come on, she felt all the tension leave her body, that it was just wonderful. And that is because our reader is BJ Harrison. I didn't announce it before because it didn't happen. I have been trying to get a hold of him for the longest time. I had the wrong email address. He'd changed it somewhere between 3 Men and a Boat and I could not get in touch with him. And when I did, he was so excited. And so we have the audio. And all he did was ask me to announce the following. So this is new things that BJ is up to. If you haven't listened to his Classic Tales podcast, you really should. He doesn't do the contextual note-giving stuff that I do. He just reads, and he reads so beautifully. And we tend to do books right before or after each other without actually checking. It just happens that way. So he said, for a subscription of $6.99 a month, you can stream or download the entire Classic Tales audiobooks library, which is sizable because he's been at this almost as long as we have. He said these are curated and award-winning titles, truly unlimited listening, no limits, no extra fees. It's called the Audiobook Library Card. You can find out more at, I know you're going to be shocked here, audiobooklibrarycard.com. I'm just ecstatic. I'm glad that he's doing this. It gives us an option other than something that's a big corporate Goliath Corp thing to get our audiobooks from. And it supports somebody who's been doing it for free for so long, for so many of us. I just could not be more excited or happier. I didn't tell Amy, I forwarded her comment to BJ. And he wrote the sweetest little note back saying that he really, really appreciated it. And it absolutely made his day to hear that somebody was so happy to hear his voice as well. That's the very exciting news about Moby Dick, is we have a really good version of the book to listen to. And the other thing that's going on with Moby Dick is it's a big book and there's a lot that goes on. Not a surprise. There's no way I could do audio notes for Moby Dick without killing myself or making everybody's ears bleed, because there's just too much. So instead, what I've done, and this is the first time I've done it because again, technology caught up with us, I have been able to take the full text of Moby Dick off of Gutenberg.org and put it on my own page. And then I've been able to do footnotes, like active clickable footnotes. And they're not just clickable. You can hover over the footnote in the full text and see the footnote. Sometimes those footnotes are pictures. Sometimes they are text. Sometimes I'm copying them from a website and tailoring it so that the grammar fits. Sometimes it's just me. This is just private. This is just entre nous, those of us who are listening to the book. And I'm not putting a bibliography in or anything. I am just going as fast as I can because there's so much. So this is not out for the public. It's a private link that you will get if you are listening to the book at craftlit.com/premium, if you are listening on the app, or if you are listening on Patreon. Wow, I couldn't remember the name. But I'm excited that I'm able to do it this way. I am using those footnotes as my recording notes. And I don't talk about everything. I go through the list as written and bring up the stuff that I think is going to make the listening more interesting to you, or at least make it land more accurately for what Melville was going after for you. It also gives you the opportunity, if you so desire, to be reading the text while you are listening and see the notes in context as well. So that, I'm very excited that we've been able to do that. I'm so grateful that technology finally did something that I wanted it to. Took a while, but it got there, and I'll take it. And this week, the tea that I am drinking to keep my voice supple is Gratitude Blend. And there's a reason for that, which I will explain shortly. Black tea, orange peels, blue cornflowers, strawberries, raspberry leaves, bergamot oil, and strawberry essence. If you like fruit teas, berry teas and things, but you don't like them too overly saturated or too sweet or too, what's the thing that they always do on the Great British Bake Off? If people put the liquid essence, like rosewater essence or something like that, or orange essence into a production that they're doing on the show, Paul Hollywood will often say, it's too much, you should have used the real thing. Sometimes fruit teas, commercially made fruit teas, taste like that to me, like it's a little too chemical on the nose. Oh, this is not. This is a beautiful, now it's a black tea, it has caffeine, but it is lovely. It's just fruity enough to be able to tell that there's fruit. You can taste the strawberry. The bergamot is very, very mild. I know some people really don't like it. That's the thing that makes Earl Grey taste like Earl Grey. I love it. Oh, it's good. It's good and it's appropriate because I have a lot of gratitude for you all today. I have spent the last week getting emails and messages from so many people, listeners who I haven't heard from in years. And boy, it was lovely to see your name pop up in my world again, especially people who we were all on Ravelry together all the time. And I recognized your handles, and it was lovely to hear from you. But it was especially lovely to hear that my thinking isn't off, that we all are very cringe about advertisements and things like that. We also have received some very creative ideas for how to both do advertising, but not make you necessarily have to listen to them. We can't do anything, like we can't turn the volume down on them on our end. But what we can do is we can make sure you know exactly when they're coming and exactly how long they will be. You see what I'm saying? As listener Jennifer said, Heather, it is not 2006 anymore. People don't have to know how to hijack their own RSS feed. Everybody has a fast forward button somewhere on their podcast player, especially if you know how long you're fast winding for. It's easy enough to do. We also got an interesting idea of using some very soothing music as a cue. Like if I say, we're going to take a little break to listen to some advertisements, come back in 60 seconds, and while I'm saying all of that, have a music cue playing underneath so that you have plenty of time to fast wind, and then a music cue after the break so that you'll be able to hear the music again and know that you've fast wound fast enough or far enough. We would also make the Book Talk Begins At time code be the time code for when the advertisements should end, so that if you wanted to skip the crafty chat in general, you would be skipping the ads as well. None of this is written in stone. A lot of you took this as a call for please join Patreon. I really appreciate that so much, but that I really was not trolling for money to come in through Patreon or anywhere else. I deeply appreciate it. Several people said, I've been meaning to do this for a long time, and this was the kick in the pants that I needed. Thank you so much. We all thank you. But that was definitely not my point or my purpose in bringing it up. So thank you for being so kind and generous with your time to send in these ideas. We're figuring it out on this end. I just feel better knowing that we all feel the same way. Late stage capitalism sucks. And yeah, so we'll figure it out, but we'll make sure that you don't get ambushed by advertisements no matter what. And we'll do our best to keep off-color advertisements out. There's a lot that I can do on YouTube to keep questionable ads out. There is not so much I can do elsewhere. It's fairly limited. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say is several people wrote and thought that this was really tacky on Libsyn's part to write and kind of nudge me this way. This was actually a personal email to me from the vice president, who I've been friends with for almost 20 years now. This was him looking at statistics and realizing that I was way behind everybody else at my level, and he knows me well enough to know that I wasn't paying attention to this. This was more him being concerned for me. And yes, I'm sure Libsyn, I know they take a cut of advertising fees. That is just the way life is. But he was giving me the links that were recommended industry-wide, just so I could see how far off I was from what reality is. He was not saying CraftLit needs to be doing these things. It was just a heads up. I'm worried that you don't know this, which I appreciate. One of the reasons why I love being with Libsyn. They also have tutorials on how to actually pick the slot, how to make sure that you're not interrupting the flow of your show. So they're being responsible about this. They just late stage capitalism, all of us. So yeah, I didn't want any shade to get thrown on Libsyn. They are being good Libsyn, as they have been for 19 years. Last week we had some fun with Your Ladyship and found that she was not nearly as snooty and difficult as people had anticipated, which again is one of those storylines that, well, I love, but I also think Mrs. Gaskell loves as well, where you go into a situation thinking you know what someone will be like, only to find that you are absolutely 100% wrong, and that they were really actually quite a bit more wonderful than you thought. We're going to have another arc like that. We start with today's chapter, and I think it takes 3 chapters to do this entire arc. So again, you may think you know where this is going. You may think that you are hearing an old book play on old tropes that are outdated. Don't let yourself go down that road, because that's not what's going on. Oh, and I also loved at the end of the last chapter when the women were walking home in the moonlight and there was the conversation about, don't you mind this? Isn't this unpleasant for you? No. And you get the sense that no, it would be great if we had a carriage, but also no, actually they really do appreciate being able to look at the stars and to enjoy a lovely night out. And I thought, for women at this time, especially women of a certain age, this was an awful lot of freedom for them as well. And it just made me happy. It made me happy that they live in a place where they can do this, because that wouldn't have been true in Manchester or Drumble. Things to know for this chapter. Michaelmas to Ladies' Day is September 29th to March 25th. So basically fall, winter, early spring. There will be a reference, I have never heard of this before, to Wombwell's Lions. George Wombwell, Wombwell, lived from 1777 to 1850. He had a traveling menagerie, which I think is just as awful as we probably imagine it to have been. He also, rather famously, was the person who bred the first lion to be born in England. It didn't go well after that, though, for the bull mastiffs. Because apparently, and I have a link out to the one sheet, there's like a press release about this. Apparently, kind of like bear baiting, he decided to have the lion fight 6 bull mastiffs. The lion was fine, period. I'm not going to talk any more about that. You can go read the article if you're interested in it. But Wombwell's lions were famous. And famous because he was famous for his menagerie. Then there's going to be a reference to turbans. Lots of references to turbans. Turbans were still popular, or were popular, period, full stop, in the 1840s. They were no longer popular by the time Elizabeth Gaskell was writing this. So it would have been kind of turbans. I understand. They didn't understand fashion back then. It would have had that vibe for the readers at the time. For us, it's all old stuff, so whatever. However, this turban winds up being important in other resonant ways, kind of as we go through. The other thing that this is mentioned with turbans as a form of ladies' dress, as a hat, there is a reference to the Saracen's Head turban. There was a Saracen's Head in London. The original one was demolished in 1868 to, I think, put in a hyperspace bypass or something unpleasant. But We've come across the word Saracen before, Saracen. This was a Crusader era term for, honestly, it was probably just a blanket term for brown people, Arabs, Muslims, fill in the blank. It was just going to be a blanket term, honestly, for anybody who didn't look like they came from England. However, there were many Saracen Head pubs and inns that are still around in England today, and some of them have been in the news in the last 4 or 5 years. But I had pretty much the worst case scenario in my mind, and I am sure that there are worst case scenarios out there. But when I did a search for Saracen Head pub signage, the kind of signs that hang off the side of the pub that have either painted or carved words/letter. It's the stuff that makes it look ye olde to Americans, is what I'm saying. I expected that the artwork on these things would have been quite upsetting to modern eyes. I was really quite pleasantly surprised to find that most of the ones that I found pictures of were not. They were definitely men in turbans. They were definitely brown-skinned men in turbans with beards, but they didn't look like crazy holding scimitars trying to kill you, which is what I was expecting. I'm sure they're out there, but mercifully, the Google Net did not send that my way. So there it is. Turbans are a thing. Brown skin is going to be a thing. The George and the Assembly Rooms. In Cranford, there is the George Inn. That's the big inn. At some point in the past 50, 100 years, the wealthy people in town added an assembly room on to the George Inn. This is very similar to what we saw happening in Emma, that with the inn, there was the dance room, the room that was big enough to hold a dance in if you weren't going to do it at somebody's estate. Assembly rooms were also where, if there were speakers who were going to come to town, or like in North and South, the vicar would go speak to the public, probably not very excitingly, but he would go speak at an assembly room or a lyceum, something like that. This was the same idea. This one is just inside the George Inn, very much like in Emma. Clothes maids, Maids. I'm pretty sure I know what they are. I could not find pictures of them online. I found references to them in antique catalogs, but no imagery. I'm thinking that when we watch movies or TV shows that come from where they're placed in an earlier era, and you see a woman having to get dressed behind a screen, and that screen they're kind of tossing their clothes over the top, I think clothes maids were that, or that plus constructed structures that would actually make it easy for you to hang up gown in a way that would make it easier to put on, especially if you were by yourself. I am not at all positive about this. I do know from what happens in this chapter that they must have been taller than Miss Pole, and that's the only information I can give you, is it must have been some kind of a screen and taller than her. There will be a reference to Thaddeus of Warsaw, the Hungarian brothers, Don Sebastian, the young protector of Santo Sebastiani. All of these names are going to come up. These were all from books written between 1803 and 1814 by the Porter sisters. I have never heard of them before, which on my Northanger Abbey scale of melodrama to schlock makes me think these are probably closer to the schlock end. They are all also going to be referenced by Miss Pole, and clearly this is a hint that she reads too much in the bad Northanger Abbey kind of way. Mrs. Gaskell is digging at somebody. Actually, she does that several times in this chapter. There's going to be a reference to the Witch of Endor. I had forgotten that the Witch of Endor is biblical. It is a biblical reference. This comes from 1 Samuel chapter 28. It's all of chapter 28, where Saul hunts down a medium, the witch of Endor. He has the witch raise the shadow of the prophet Samuel so that Saul can ask, why has God forsaken him? It doesn't go well for Saul, who becomes unalived. And that's it. The important thing is the Witch of Endor is the phrasing that gets used over and over and over. And I thought, I wonder, for me, modern reference is Endor from Star Wars. So I had such cognitive dissonance with that one. But if you want to read the whole story, it's actually kind of an interesting little snapshot of a story from the Bible. 1 Samuel chapter 28. Go have fun. Let's see. Death watch beetles and winding sheets. Again, we've talked about the winding sheets on the candles, the way that the wax drips down. Apparently, the sound of the death watch beetle and the discussing/seeing winding sheets on candles are apparently omens of death to come. you will hear that Miss Jenkins only ever used the term roly-polies, not winding sheets, roly-polies, to mention like the rolls of wax coming down off a candle. She would not call them winding sheets. I was very confused by this when I first listened to the chapter and went, okay. So I had a little look up on that one. More card game references. In preference today, they're going to talk about a pool. The pool is what you probably think it is. It's like the kitty. It's what everybody pays into in order to play the game. And you could pay in with tokens or coins or, whatever you guys agree on, toothpicks, anything. There's going to be mention to Queen Charlotte and the Gunning sisters. This is Queen Charlotte, yes, Bridgerton, wife of George III. The Gunning sisters were, at the same time, supposed to be unbelievably beautiful. They were both actresses briefly, and then they found husbands and were not actresses any longer. But they were just beautiful and famous, and that's really all that matters. A chapeau bras is a specific type of hat. It's usually a bicorn, sometimes a tricorn. So if you think Napoleon hat, they were actually designed to be folded and carried under an arm. You could flatten them and fold them under your arm, which makes a lot of sense. That would be so much easier than trying to transport one of those suckers in the shape that it's in. And the literal translation, obviously, whether or not you can understand my French, chapeau de bras is hat arm. They were popular in the 18th century. They are not in fashion now. That's the important part. There'll be a reference to the national schoolboys. These were kids, there were elementary schools that you could pay to have your kids go to, but then the national schools were elementary schools that were set up by the Church of England. So the local vicar would be kind of the head of those schools. The description of the minister in today's chapter, his behavior, his fears, his hopes, his dreams, his relationship to the kids, fabulous. And it comes at the end of today's chapter, and I just loved it. There's a phrase, I don't remember if we've ever come across this in anything else. Legerdemain, Legerdemain. This is the skillful use of one's hands when performing conjuring tricks, which actually comes into play today. All right, let's listen to Noel Badrian read us chapter 9 of Cranford. This chapter is called Signor Brunoni. If you are listening to your own version, please fast wind to 56 minutes and 52 seconds. All right, here we go.
Chapter 9 of Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Noel Badrian. Signor Brunoni. Soon after the events of which I gave an account in my last paper, I was summoned home by my father's illness, and for a time I forgot, in anxiety about him, to wonder how my dear friends at Cranford were getting on, or how Lady Glenmire could reconcile herself to the dullness of the long visit which she was still paying to her sister-in-law, Mrs. Jameson. When my father grew a little stronger, I accompanied him to the seaside, so that altogether I seemed banished from Cranford, and was deprived of the opportunity of hearing any chance intelligence of the dear little town for the greater part of that year. Late in November, when we had returned home again, and my father was once more in good health, I received a letter from Miss Matty, and a very mysterious letter it was. She began many sentences without ending them, running them one into another, in much the same confused sort of way in which written words run together on blotting paper. All I could make out was that, if my father was better, which she hoped he was, and would take warning and wear a greatcoat from Michaelmas to Lady Day, if turbans were in fashion, could I tell her? Such a piece of gaiety was going to happen as had not been seen or known of since Wombwell's lions came, when one of them ate a little child's arm, and she was, perhaps, too old to care about dress. But a new cap she must have, and, having heard that turbans were worn, and some of the county families likely to come, she would like to look tidy if I would bring her a cap from the milliner I employed. And, oh dear, how careless of her to forget that she wrote to beg I would come and pay her a visit next Tuesday, when she hoped to have something to offer me in the way of amusement, which she would not now more particularly describe. Only sea green was her favourite colour. So she ended her letter, but in a P.S. she added she thought she might as well tell me what was the peculiar attraction to Cranford just now. Signor Brunoni was going to exhibit his wonderful magic in the Cranford Assembly Rooms on Wednesday and Friday evening in the following week. I was very glad to accept the invitation from my dear Miss Matty, independently of the conjurer, and most particularly anxious to prevent her from disfiguring her small, gentle, mousy face with a great Saracen's Head turban, and accordingly I bought her a pretty, neat, middle-aged cap, which, however, was rather a disappointment to her, when on my arrival she followed me into my bedroom, ostensibly to poke the fire, but in reality, I do believe, to see if the sea-green turban was not inside the cap-box with which I had travelled. It was in vain that I twirled the cap round on my hand to exhibit back and side fronts. Her heart had been set upon a turban, and all she could do was to say, with resignation in her look and voice, "I am sure you did your best, my dear. It is just like the caps all the ladies in Cranford are wearing, and they have had theirs for a year, I dare say. I should have liked something newer, I confess, something more like the turbans Miss Betty Barker tells me Queen Adelaide wears. But it is very pretty, my dear, and I dare say lavender will wear better than sea green. Well, after all, what is dress that we should care about it? You'll tell me if you want anything, my dear. Here is the bell. I suppose turbans have not got down to Drumble yet." So saying, the dear old lady, gently bemoaning herself out of the room, leaving me to dress for the evening, when, as she informed me, she expected Miss Pole and Mrs. Forrester, and she hoped I should not feel myself too much tired to join the party. Of course I should not, and I made some haste to unpack and arrange my dress. But with all my speed I heard the arrivals and the buzz of conversation in the next room before I was ready. Just as I opened the door I caught the words, "I was foolish to expect anything very genteel out of the Drumble shops. Poor girl, she did her best, I've no doubt. But for all that, I had rather that she blamed Drumble and me than disfigure herself with a turban." Miss Pole was always the person, in the trio of Cranford ladies now assembled, to have had adventures. She was in the habit of spending the morning in rambling from shop to shop, not to purchase anything, except an occasional reel of cotton or a piece of tape, but to see the new articles and report upon them, and to collect all the stray pieces of intelligence in the town. She had a way, too, of demurely popping hither and thither into all sorts of places, to gratify her curiosity on any point, a way which, if she had not looked so very genteel and prim, might have been considered impertinent. And now, by the expressive way in which she cleared her throat, and waited for all minor subjects, such as caps and turbans, to be cleared off the course, we knew she had something very particular to relate when the due pause came. And I defy any people, possessed of common modesty, to keep up a conversation long, where one among them sits up aloft in silence, looking down upon all the things they chance to say as trivial and contemptible, compared to what they could disclose if properly entreated. Miss Pole began. "As I was stepping out of Gordon's shop to-day, I chanced to go into the George." My Betty has a second cousin who is chambermaid there, and I thought Betty would like to hear how she was. And not seeing anyone about, I strolled up the staircase and found myself in the passage leading to the assembly room. You and I remember the assembly room, I am sure, Miss Matty, and the minuets de la cour. So I went on, not thinking of what I was about, when all at once I perceived that I was in the middle of the preparations for tomorrow night, the room being divided with great clothes maids, over which Crosby's men were tacking red flannel. Very dark and odd it seemed. It quite bewildered me, and I was going on behind the screens in my absence of mind, when a gentleman, quite the gentleman I can assure you, stepped forwards and asked if I had any business he could arrange for me. He spoke such pretty broken English I could not help thinking of Thaddeus of Warsaw and the Hungarian brothers and Santo Sebastiani, and while I was busy picturing his past life to myself, he had bowed me out of the room. But wait a minute, you have not heard half of my story yet. I was going downstairs when who should I meet but Betsy's second cousin, so of course I stopped to speak to her for Betsy's sake. And she told me that I had really seen the conjurer. The gentleman who spoke broken English was Signor Brunoni himself. Just at this moment he passed us on the stairs, making such a graceful bow, in reply to which I dropped a curtsy. All foreigners have such polite manners, one catches something of it. But when he had gone downstairs, I bethought me that if I had dropped my glove in the assembly room, it was safe in my muff all the time, but I never found it till afterwards. So I went back, and, just as I was creeping up the passage left on one side of the great screen that goes nearly across the room, who should I see but the very same gentleman that had met me before and passed me on the stairs, coming now forward from the inner part of the room, to which there is no entrance, you remember, Miss Matty, and just repeating, in his pretty broken English, the inquiry if I had any business there. I don't mean that he put it quite so bluntly, but he seemed very determined that I should not pass the screen, so, of course, I explained about my glove, which, curiously enough, I found at that very moment. Miss Pole, then, had seen the conjurer, the real live conjurer, and numerous were the questions we all asked her. Had he a beard? Was he young or old? Fair or dark? Did he look? Unable to shape my question prudently, I put it in another form. How did he look? In short, Miss Pole was the heroine of the evening, owing to her morning's encounter. If she was not the rose, that is to say, the conjurer, she had been near it. Conjuration, sleight of hand, magic, witchcraft were the subjects of the evening. Miss Pole was slightly sceptical, and inclined to think there might be a scientific solution found for even the proceedings of the Witch of Endor. Mrs. Forrester believed everything from ghosts to death watches. Miss Matty ranged between the two, always convinced by the last speaker. I think she was naturally more inclined to Mrs. Forrester's side, but a desire of proving herself a worthy sister to Miss Jenkins kept her equally balanced. Miss Jenkins, who would never allow a servant to call the little rolls of tallow that formed themselves round the candles winding sheets, but instead on their being spoken of as roly-polies. A sister of hers to be superstitious, it would never do. After tea I was dispatched downstairs into the dining parlour for the volume of the old encyclopaedia which contained the nouns beginning with C, in order that Miss Pole might prime herself with scientific explanations for the tricks of the following evening. It spoilt the pool at preference, which Miss Matty and Mrs. Forrester had been looking forward to, for Miss Pole became so much absorbed in her subject, and the plates by which it was illustrated, that we felt it would be cruel to disturb her otherwise than by one or two well-timed yawns, which I threw in now and then, for I was really touched by the meek way in which the two ladies were bearing their disappointment. But Miss Pole only read the more zealously, imparting to us no more interesting information than this. "Ah, I see, I comprehend perfectly. A represents the ball. Put A between B and D, no, between C and F, and turn the second joint of the third finger of your left hand over the wrist of your right, H. Very clear indeed. My dear Mrs. Forrester, conjuring and witchcraft is a mere affair of the alphabet. Do let me read you this one passage." Mrs. Forrester implored Miss Pole to spare her, saying from a child upwards she never could understand being read aloud to, and I dropped the pack of cards, which I had been shuffling very audibly, and by this discreet movement I obliged Miss Pole to perceive that preference was to have been the order of the evening, and to propose rather unwillingly that the pool should commence. The pleasant brightness that stole over the other two ladies' faces on this. Miss Matty had one or two twinges of self-reproach for having interrupted Miss Pole in her studies, and did not remember her cards well, or give her full attention to the game, until she had soothed her conscience by offering to lend the volume of the encyclopaedia to Miss Pole, who accepted it thankfully, and said Betty should take it home when she came with the lantern. The next evening we were all in a little gentle flutter at the idea of the gaiety before us. Miss Matty went up to dress betimes, and hurried me until I was ready, when we found we had an hour and a half to wait before the doors opened at 7 precisely, and we had only 20 yards to go. However, as Miss Matty said, it would not do to get too much absorbed in anything and forget the time, so she thought we had better sit quietly without lighting the candles till 5 minutes to 7. So Miss Matty dozed and I knitted. At length we set off, and at the door under the carriageway at the George we met Mrs. Forrester and Miss Pole. The latter was discussing the subject of the evening with more vehemence than ever, and throwing A's and B's at our heads like hailstones. She had even copied one or two of the receipts, as she called them, for the different tricks, on backs of letters, ready to explain and to detect Signor Brunoni's arts. We went into the cloakroom adjoining the assembly room. Miss Matty gave a sigh or two to her departed youth, and the remembrance of the last time she had been there, as she adjusted her pretty new cap before the strange, quaint old mirror in the cloakroom. The assembly room had been added to the inn about 100 years before by the different county families, who met together there once a month during the winter to dance and play at cards. Many a county beauty had first swum through the minuet that she afterwards danced before Queen Charlotte in this very room. It was said that one of the Gunnings had graced the apartment with her beauty. It was certain that a rich and beautiful widow, Lady Williams, had been smitten with the noble figure of a young artist who was staying with some family in the neighbourhood for professional purposes, and accompanied his patrons to the Cranford assembly. And a pretty bargain poor Lady Williams had had of her handsome husband, if all tales were true. Now no beauty blushed and dimpled along the sides of the Cranford assembly room. No handsome artist won hearts by his bow, chapeau bras in hand. The old room was dingy, the salmon-coloured paint had faded into a drab, great pieces of plaster had chipped off from the white wreaths and festoons on its walls, but still a mouldy odour of aristocracy lingered about the place, and a dusty recollection of the days that were gone made Miss Matty and Mrs. Forrester bridle up as they entered, and walk mincingly up the room as if they were a number of genteel observers instead of two little boys with a stick of toffee between them with which to beguile the time. We stopped short at the second front row. I could hardly understand why, until I heard Miss Pole ask a stray waiter if any of the county families were expected, and when he shook his head and believed not, Mrs. Forrester and Miss Matty moved forward, and our party represented a conversational square. The front row was soon augmented and enriched by Lady Glenmire and Mrs. Jameson. We 6 occupied the 2 front rows, and our aristocratic seclusion was respected by the groups of shopkeepers who strayed in from time to time and huddled together on the back benches. At least I conjectured so, from the noise they made and the sonorous bumps they gave in sitting down. But when, in weariness of the obstinate green curtain that would not draw up, but would stare at me with 2 odd eyes, seen through holes as in the old tapestry story, I would fain have looked round at the merry chattering people behind me, Miss Pole clutched my arm and begged me not to turn, for it was not the thing. What the thing was, I never could find out, but it must have been something eminently dull and tiresome. However, we all sat, eyes right, square front, gazing at the tantalizing curtain, and hardly speaking intelligibly, we were so afraid of being caught in the vulgarity of making any noise in a place of public amusement. Mrs. Jameson was the most fortunate, for she fell asleep. At length the eyes disappeared, the curtain quivered, one side went up before the other, which stuck fast. It was dropped again, and with a fresh effort and a vigorous pull from some unseen hand, it flew up, revealing to our sight a magnificent gentleman in the Turkish costume, seated before a little table, gazing at us. I should have said with the same eyes that I had last seen through the hole in the curtain, with calm and condescending dignity, like a being of another sphere, as I heard a sentimental voice ejaculate behind me. "That's not Signor Brunoni," said Miss Pole decidedly, and so audibly that I am sure he heard, for he glanced down over his flowing beard at our party with an air of mute reproach. Signor Brunoni had no beard, but perhaps he'll come soon. So she lulled herself into patience. Meanwhile Miss Matty had reconnoitred through her eyeglass, wiped it, and looked again. Then she turned round and said to me in a kind, mild, sorrowful tone, "You see, my dear, turbans are worn." But we had no time for more conversation. The Grand Turk, as Miss Pole chose to call him, arose and announced himself as Signor Brunoni. "I don't believe him," exclaimed Miss Pole in a defiant manner. He looked at her again with the same dignified upbraiding in his countenance. "I don't," she repeated more positively than ever. Signor Brunoni had not got that muffy sort of thing about his chin, but looked like a close-shaved Christian gentleman. Miss Pole's energetic speeches had the good effect of waking Mrs. Jameson, who opened her eyes wide in sign of the deepest attention, a proceeding which silenced Miss Pole and encouraged the Grand Turk to proceed, which he did in very broken English, so broken that there was no cohesion between the parts of his sentences, a fact which he himself perceived at last, and so left off speaking and proceeded to action. Now we were astonished. How he did his tricks I could not imagine, no, not even when Miss Pole pulled out her pieces of paper and began reading aloud, or at least in a very audible whisper, the separate receipts for the most common of his tricks. If ever I saw a man frown and look enraged, I saw the Grand Turk frown at Miss Pole. But, as she said, what could be expected but unchristian looks from a Mussulman? If Miss Pole were sceptical and more engrossed with her receipts and diagrams than with his tricks, Miss Matty and Mrs. Forrester were mystified and perplexed to the highest degree. Mrs. Jameson kept taking her spectacles off and wiping them, as if she thought it was something defective in them which made the legerdemain. And Lady Glenmire, who had seen many curious sights in Edinburgh, was very much struck with the tricks, and would not at all agree with Miss Pole, who declared that anybody could do them with a little practice, and that she would, herself, undertake to do all he did, with 2 hours given to study the encyclopedia and make her third finger flexible. At last Miss Matty and Mrs. Forrester became perfectly awe-stricken. They whispered together, I sat just behind them, so I could not help hearing what they were saying. Miss Matty asked Mrs. Forrester if she thought it was quite right to have come to see such things. She could not help fearing they were lending encouragement to something that was not quite... A little shake of the head filled up the blank. Mrs. Forrester replied that the same thought had crossed her mind. She, too, was feeling very uncomfortable. It was so very strange. She was quite certain that it was her pocket-handkerchief which was in that loaf just now, and it had been in her own hand not 5 minutes before. She wondered who had furnished the bread. She was sure it could not be Dakin, because he was the church warden. Suddenly Miss Matty half turned towards me. "Will you look, my dear? You are a stranger in the town, and it won't give rise to unpleasant reports. Will you just look round and see if the rector is here? If he is, I think we may conclude that this wonderful man is sanctioned by the church, and that will be a great relief to my mind." I looked, and I saw the tall, thin, dry, rusty rector sitting surrounded by national schoolboys, guarded by troops of his own sex from any approach of the many Cranford spinsters. His kind face was all agape with broad smiles, and the boys around him were in chinks of laughing. I told Miss Matty that the church was smiling approval, which set her mind at ease. I have never named Mr. Hayter, the rector, because I, as a well-to-do and happy young woman, never came in contact with him. He was an old bachelor, but as afraid of matrimonial reports getting abroad about him as any girl of 18, and he would rush into a shop or drive down an entry sooner than encounter any of the Cranford ladies in the street, and as for the preference parties, I did not wonder at his not accepting invitations to them. To tell the truth, I always suspected Miss Pole of having given a very vigorous chase to Mr. Hayter when he first came to Cranford, and not the less because now she appeared to share so vividly in his dread lest her name should ever be coupled with his. He found all his interests among the poor and helpless. He had treated the national schoolboys this very night to the performance, and virtue was for once its own reward, for they guarded him right and left, and clung round him as if he had been the queen bee and they the swarm. He felt so safe in their environment that he could even afford to give our party a bow as we filed out. Miss Pole ignored his presence and pretended to be absorbed in convincing us that we had been cheated and had not seen Signor Brunoni after all. End of chapter 9.
Okay. I couldn't decide if I was really frustrated and angry with Miss Pole or if I was just going to fall apart in hysterics over her behavior. Either way, that woman was out of control in today's episode. I loved it. I have a horrible sinking fear that I am Miss Pole, which I think is part of where my terror comes from. I thought Gaskell did just a marvelous job of describing her behavior throughout this chapter. She is going to be on fire for the next chapter too. So if you really don't like Miss Pole, I hope you can make it through the next chapter. If you get a kick out of her the way I do, the next chapter is going to be fun. You're going to want to throw her out a window. It's fantastic. The assembly room. I thought it was interesting that just like in Emma's Highbury, where it was clear that the population of Highbury had diminished somewhat, that the height of popularity of the assembly room was prior to Emma's world. And the assembly room here sure sounds like it had seen better days. It makes me think that this is like Highbury 20 years later. It's still falling apart more. And that's an interesting shift of population and resources and money. And I don't think we've ever had an opportunity to see something like that happening back to back where, Emma happened 20 years later, Cranford is supposed to be taking place. 30 years later, it's being written. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. I also liked that Miss Pole said to our narrator, Mary Smith, that to turn around and look back at the minister is not the thing, which is, I believe, what Emma's dad said. It was also funny because Miss Poole said it is not the thing, and yet she was the one who was doing the annoying for poor Signor Brunoni. Good times with Gaskell. That sounds like it could be a traveling show. Don't forget to grab your special discount from Plum Deluxe Tea. Again, today was the Gratitude Blend. And if you go to bit.ly/craftlit-PDTEA for Plum Deluxe Tea, you will get your discount for any tea you buy. It doesn't just have to be the ones that are listed as the CraftLit collection. You can get anything you want. And we were talking on Thursday night when we watched The Thin Man. We were talking beforehand. Jamie is not a huge tea drinker. However, I did tell her that Plum Deluxe Tea has a quiz on its site that I have found to be quite accurate. If you are not a tea drinker but you're curious, this would be a good time because you could get it at a discount. And you don't, there's no requirement. Like, you don't have to buy 40 packs of tea. You can buy one. You could even buy a little tester bag if you wanted to. Either way, I think that their quiz delivered unto me recommendations that were 100% accurate. So if you've never really been a tea drinker, but you're kind of curious, that would be a good way to discover it. And I'll make sure that the link to that quiz is in the show notes for you as well. All right, I'm going to go lie down. You go have a great rest of your day. I will talk to you soon. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Be well. Have a good one. Bye. You can find show notes for this episode and links to other episodes at craftlit.com. CraftLit also appears anywhere you can get a podcast: iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and on, including its own dedicated app. There are lots of ways to support CraftLit, from patreon.com/craftlit to craftlit.com memberships and channel memberships on YouTube. You can find out more details at craftlit.com/premium. And as always, thank you for your support. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.